Hello, welcome to Behind the Wall. I'm Stan Grant. The Chinese Communist Party will celebrate its 100th anniversary in July, and those in power are keen to make sure historical events are being remembered correctly, or their version of historical events anyway. A new hotline has been launched by the Chinese cyber regulator so citizens can report online criticism of the party to authorities. The crackdown is the latest move to quash dissenters in the communist state, where official versions of historical events are regularly changed and rewritten. James Griffiths is the author of The Great Firewall of China, and he joins me now from Hong Kong. James, it's good to have you with us. In the firing line here are what the Chinese Communist Party deems historical nihilists. Who or what are these historical nihilists?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we've seen a kind of huge amount of sensitivity, as you said, coming up to this key anniversary around, what the historical narrative is and, how that might affect people's opinions of the Communist Party. And so basically anyone who has a particularly negative view of how the Communist Party acted in the past or certain events that it caused to happen in the past will be considered a historical nihilist and, might come a cropper of this new policy and these new reporting hotlines.
Now, James, how do they identify who these people may be? We're hearing reports of different people who are informing on others online, who are going to the authorities and saying, look, I've seen what someone's put up. This person is crossing the line. They're breaking the law. Is this citizens watching and reporting on other citizens?
Yeah, there's been a kind of open encouragement by state media, by various Communist Party groups, by officials, for people, to take this upon themselves, to call out companies, historians, academics, journalists, commentators, call out people they think are maligning the country or not doing enough to speak out. We saw this a lot recently over the Xinjiang cotton boycott and the kind of counter boycott in China. And, it's even reached a stage where people have been called out not for saying the wrong thing, but just not for speaking out at all. So they're being told, well, why aren't you speaking out in defense of China? You must be, anti-communist or anti-Chinese.
And we know that under Xi Jinping's more authoritarian turn, that there's been a crackdown on dissent and on dissidents and people jailed. Is that what people are looking at here? If you are seen to contravene this law, if you are one of these historical nihilists, that you will go to jail?
Yeah, well, China has a very broad set of laws, set of powers with which to detain people, both extra legal detentions, which we're aware of happening in black jails, and RSDL, which is a kind of form of extra legal detention, and criminally prosecuting people. There are a variety of crimes. The most common one is called picking quarrels and causing trouble, and these are just very, very broad crimes that can be used to crack down on dissent. Even if that dissent doesn't really amount to to doing much of anything beyond criticizing the Communist Party in public or criticizing particular government events.
James, how far does this go? This sounds very opaque, and someone can be accused of a crime they didn't even know necessarily they were going to be committing. We've seen the impact in Hong Kong, and we've seen the impact on free speech there. And working for the media, as you do in Hong Kong at CNN, are you aware of this? Are these issues to be factored into your own editorial decisions?
I think all reporters who have worked in China, as I have in the past, or now work in Hong Kong under the new regime of the national security law, which came into force last year, you're very aware of the potential for your work to cause trouble, but you continue as normal, and everyone continues to report as they always would have done. But the risk is not so much to journalists as it's to, ordinary people and to potential sources. We've seen this in China for years, where people would not choose to talk to foreign media, or if they would ask to use a pseudonym. And that's really something that's kicked into high gear in Hong Kong since the passage of the NSL. You get professors and experts and even ordinary members of the public where once they would have been happy to be quoted on a host of issues are now saying, actually, I don't really want to talk to foreign media on this topic because I'm worried that it could, come back to me.
And James, I remember from when I was reporting in China for CNN, and the whole idea of what was allowed on the internet, what people could say on sites like Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter, what people could say on social media, was always shifting, was always moving. At times, the government would allow a lot of criticism of issues like corruption and so on. How is that changing now?
There has been a huge kind of clamping down of speech online in the last few years. Under President Xi Jinping, generally, there's been a kind of chilling of speech and controlling of what people can say. There is still some debate on Weibo and on other platforms, but it's much, much more limited than it ever was in the past. And also the potential repercussions have got a lot higher. When people were censored on Weibo, in maybe 5+ years ago, they just had their accounts deleted, maybe even just posts deleted. Whereas now the potential for you to be dragged in for a conversation with the police or even something worse and potentially face prosecution is much, much higher. So the bar for taking part in these discussions or taking part in debate is higher for people.
And James, it also raises the question, doesn't it, about what is truth and who owns the truth, what version of the truth, and that the Communist Party itself is forever changing its version of the truth, rewriting its history. It's doing so again now, minimising things like the Cultural Revolution, but talking up other things like the Hong Kong handover, the strength of the Communist Party standing up to foreign powers. So that question of what is truth and what is history is always being rewritten. It's a bit of a paradox where the Communist Party might claim that right for itself and yet lock up other people for putting their versions of truth or history in the public domain.
Yeah, and they've got very sensitive about any version that isn't their own existing. And so when you have quite dangerous in terms of the historical record, quite dangerous moves like minimizing discussion of the Cultural Revolution, which already wasn't, discussed completely openly, and the kind of harm of that was minimized in the past, but now it's been even further kind of shunted aside and minimized. That potentially has real repercussions in the future for if it influences how people might act or how they might approach some similar government effort, to kind of rally nationalist or rally, populist sentiments against some kind of enemy that the government's identified. And, the lessons of the Cultural Revolution are pretty horrible and terrible ones, and, are worth learning and worth paying attention to. So it's very concerning, to see the government, which once did somewhat recognize them, minimizing them and attempting to kind of, attempting to forget them, I guess.
Just finally, James, it was long suspected, or there was a lot of conjecture about just what impact social media and the internet would have on Communist Party rule, that essentially it would not be able to withstand the democratising aspects of the internet, the free speech that comes with that. And yet, would you say right now that the state is winning, that it has turned the internet and social media into a greater tool of authoritarianism?
Yeah, when the internet first came to China, and especially when social media blew up in China, there was, this kind of one-sided view of it that, extending the ability of people to speak online and giving people more space would, result in greater democratization or at least a challenge to the government. But what people ignored is that, technology benefits governments and security states just as much as it benefits anyone else. And the Communist Party has invested huge amounts in terms of censorship, in terms of controlling the message, in terms of propaganda. And they've really managed to build, a social media, an internet environment in China that kind of validates their control, which promotes it and kind of sustains it in a more modern way and really gives them powers that they wouldn't have had 20 years ago, even if it presents some kind of smaller challenge at the same time.
James, appreciate your insights and giving us your time as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.